let's start with the basic facts. What did you find in the Alberta Health Services report that you found so interesting and I found so interesting that I had to eavesdrop about?
Well, it was very interesting. So I was particularly interested in the section on executive compensation. And in most annual reports, that section is maybe a page long, maybe a half page of notes kind of explaining the numbers and the payments you see. This one for the 2013-14 year was several pages long. And because there was such a shakeup at Alberta Health Services last year with a lot of people changing jobs, changing titles, people coming in and out and so on. And what we did find was some interesting and I think questionable payments to a number of executives. So I can give you a couple of examples.
Please do.
So people may remember back in September, Alberta Health Services let go about 5 vice presidents. Well, that turned out to be a really expensive thing to do. To be clear, they were not actually fired. These were people that were dismissed in a reduction of management at AHS.
Right, there was restructurings and that sort of thing.
They were right-sized.
Yes. Some of these vice presidents, in fact, I think all of them, had pretty lucrative contracts that provided some very big severance, some big pension when they're dismissed. So one guy, for example, Dr. David Megrin, it turns out that he received severance of about $730,000 plus a pension payment, a lump sum pension payment of about $1 million. So it cost us about $1.8 million. There was another guy, Bill Trafford. He opted to take monthly pension payments. He's getting $11,000 per month in pension for the next 10 years. That adds up to about $1.4 million. Plus $400,000 in severance. So there's another $1.8 million. So those were all due to contracts that had been signed previously. But there were some other sort of questionable deals that were made during the year. And one of them concerns a guy named Duncan Campbell. And he was the chief financial officer for a while last year. He got briefly promoted to acting CEO, lasted only a month in that job.
There was a bad tweet.
There was a bad tweet about the lab services deal in,
we
in
talked
Edmonton.
About that.
Yes, that's right. So after he was removed as acting CEO, the idea was that he would go back and become the chief financial officer again. What turns out, and we only found this out once we read the report, is that he actually took a 5-month leave of absence. Up until March 31st of this year. So we paid him $425 in salary, but he only worked 7 months of the year. Now, instead of letting him go, he's apparently got this new deal where he's going to go do a research project for AHS over the next year. They're paying him $500,000 to do that, plus $43,000 in relocation costs to move back to BC. It may be very valuable work, but again, there was sort of, this was a deal that was reached before the new CEO, Vicky Kaminsky, came in, and she told me this is probably a deal she would not have done. So those are a few examples of some of the money changing hands at AHS last year.
So are we effectively paying him a CEO salary to be a consultant?
Yeah, that appeared to be what was going on. He's actually known as an independent consultant for AHS and for the Canadian Institute of Health Information.
So how much of this information was public before?
Very little of it. We knew certainly that some of the executives had signed these very lucrative deals, and this is just the first chance we've had to see some of the numbers.
Graham, Paula, is this just a cost of doing business and necessary for restructuring the healthcare system? Or what do you, when you hear this, what do you think?
The problem is that there's been this long history of lucrative payouts of health executives, and every time it happens, the health minister of the day says this is an outrage and we're going to make sure this never happens again, until it happens again 6 months later. So I mean, it is true that Fred Horn restructured AHS. These vice presidents left. Maybe in the long term, AHS hypothetically runs leaner with 5 fewer vice presidents. I mean, we're paying them once now instead of paying them lucrative salaries for years to do work that apparently wasn't necessary, if we can get rid of them. But, for those of us, $1.8 million, I don't know if in my entire working life I will ever earn aggregate $1.8 million. I mean, for most of us, we hear those numbers and we're so gobsmacked and so frankly envious that it's hard to imagine.
It's a gift to the opposition. This goes to the...
Yeah, is this going to cause waves again?
Yeah,
do you
well,
think?
this is the kind of thing, as Paula points out, people can actually relate to this. They actually can see like $11,000 a month for 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah. So that number we can actually appreciate and be outraged by that, because the person's actually quit the job as opposed to actually getting paid to do something. But also the Wild Rose especially.
No, they didn't quit. They,
yes, fair enough.
We let
yes.
them go. That's the problem.
Yeah, they're not doing the actual work and they're getting paid. But the Wild Rose, their campaign these days is to attack the government on competency on issues like healthcare. The healthcare system isn't working, and attacking the government on perks and overspending on things like Redford's travel. This fits right into that idea that gets people upset about the government. This is AHS. It's still at arm's length, I know, from the government, but we all know it's part of the government. So this is the government.
Not as arm's length as it used to be.
Yes, that's
Fred
very
Horn
true.
has very short arms.
He's a puppeteer on this one. So I think this is going to play badly for the government, going to play right into the wheelhouse of the Wild Rose.
And what did the new CEO say is going to happen going forward then? I mean, did she discuss, like, for example, as you mentioned, AHS CEOs haven't exactly had a long lifespan recently. So, like, what happens if she is, severed?
Well, her contract is actually seems to be a little more reasonable at this point. They have a new salary structure that she is a part of. It's based more on what's reasonable in the public sector. They say the pension plan that some of these older executives were a part of is now been discontinued, although there's still a few people on the payroll that will get those payouts because they were part of the plan up until this year. So we may still see a few more big payouts to come when some of the older executives depart. But for the most part, the AHS line right now, and the line from Health Minister Fred Horn, is that everything's cleaned up. It's much more transparent. It's much more reasonable. I guess we'll leave it to the public to see if that's the case.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for coming in to give us an update on this.
No problem.